So here we go. This is 3 big ideas that changed our business forever. As I said, my name is TJ Logan. You can follow me on Twitter at TJ Logan if you want to do that. So what am I talking about today? Well, I'm going to talk about 3 big paradigm shifts that should have us all asking questions about the way that we operate. I think far too often we get our heads buried a little bit in the sand with our daily work, and these kinds of things blow right past us. Or we have something come along that challenges us, and we make some bad assumptions based just on what we can see, and probably more importantly, what we can't see. So today I plan to talk about these 3 types of things. Quick disclaimer, I'm probably going to ask more questions or create more questions than I do answers. Your job is to figure out how this applies for you and your operations. That's something I really can't tell you. So here we go. Let's jump right into our first big idea. Big idea number 1 is that customer service is no longer a dirty word. What do I mean by that? Well, this is something that people in our field have struggled with for a very long time. It's the idea that the values of customer service are reserved only for private industry, for private business. Those values really don't fit well for us in higher education because private industry is bad. They're all about money. They're all about those types of things. And we're good. We're all about education, developing people, that kind of stuff. But there's no way that we could value the same types of things. I'd argue that our view on customer service is based on a very traditional model, though, and that customer service has essentially changed quite a bit over time, leaving us with an old way and a new way for customer service. So what's that look like? Well, the old way in customer service is a lot like that infamous Nordstrom story. If you never heard the story, it goes a little something like this. Some 30-odd years ago, a man walks into a Nordstrom's department store in Fairbanks, Alaska, of all places, with a set of snow tires. He walks up to the customer service counter, he hoists these tires up onto the counter and says to the woman, ma'am, I need to return these tires. Now, Nordstrom's was and still is notoriously known for its great customer service. So the woman asks the man if there's anything wrong with the tires. The man says no. And so the woman behind the counter reaches into the cash drawer, pulls out $200 and hands it to the man without any other questions. One big problem with this scenario, Nordstrom's doesn't sell snow tires. You see, Nordstrom's invented the mantra, the customer is always right. Now, the story actually happened, I'm not sure, but it's a great urban legend that illustrates the old values and new values of customer service. These are the types of examples that really bother us in higher education. In fact, just recently, 2008, an article titled Arguments Against Applying Customer Service Paradigm states that satisfaction is not an appropriate gauge of quality in higher education. In business, the customer is always right. However, in education, the student is not always right. I couldn't agree more with that article, but I think that it's missing a piece, and that's that customer service doesn't mean that the customer is always right anymore. It means something very different. With recent evolution in technology, Web 2.0, social media, customer service is transformed. Customer service is now all about transparency. It's all about responsiveness. It's all about empowering customers. And I would argue that those values align pretty well with our own. So here's an example of that. At the University of Florida, where I have the great privilege of working, a few years ago we were making roommate matches in the very same way that many other institutions were and possibly still are making roommate matches. We were making them randomly. We were making roommate matches randomly because we tried everything else and it wasn't working for us. We tried using surveys that ask questions about smoking, sleeping habits, is it okay if your roommate eats your Pop-Tarts, those types of things. And what we found, by and large, was that parents were filling out the surveys, not students. So the old joke in our operations is that we got pretty darn good at matching parents, but we weren't good at matching our students. So, of course, the biggest problem was that with random roommate matching, it didn't make sense to our students. When they asked us how we made a roommate match, we didn't have much of an answer. And even worse, when they had a roommate conflict, it was our fault, not theirs. So this is where the new values come in. When we thought about empowering students, when we thought about being transparent, we knew we had to make a shift. We chose to do this by using a roommate matching tool on Facebook, it's called RoomSync, to allow students to find their own roommates. And in doing that, we not only shifted the responsibility, but we also empowered our students as customers. We allowed them to make decisions based on what was important to them. Now, I can tell you all about RoomSync, how it works, that sort of thing, but the most interesting thing here is really more about the outcomes. The first thing that happened was that we increased the number of mutually requested roommate matches dramatically. So more people were getting to live with someone that they thought they wanted to. Emphasis on thought. The second, and probably most important thing that happened was that the number of room changes, contrary to what most of us thought would happen, actually stayed exactly the same. So let's dig into that a little bit. That seems strange to us. We talked with our staff and asked them, did you see any differences in roommate conflicts and room changes and things like that? And here's what they had to say. They said students are still having roommate conflicts, and so their relationships with each other haven't changed, but their relationship with us has changed dramatically. In the past, those students would come to us and they'd say, you, pointing the finger at us, you put me in this position, now fix it. And now, students are coming to us and saying, I am in a tough situation, can you help me? By empowering students, by being transparent, we've gone from being in conflict with our customers to partnering with them on how to resolve their issues. We went from being on the other side of the table to sitting right alongside them, and that is exactly where we want to be. That is big idea number one. Customer service is no longer a dirty word. And so I would ask you, how are you being transparent? How are you empowering your customers? How are you partnering with them? Let's move on. Big idea number two. We're no longer the sole source of community. This is huge. To illustrate this, I want to share a very personal story. The day that I graduated from high school was a day full of hope and excitement like no other. This day represented a change in my life. I was going to be an adult. I was going to be free. I was going to make my own decisions. And I was hyper aware of that fact. I could not wait to go to college. So that summer, late August, I get in the car with my parents. We had packed up 2 whole boxes that contained everything I own, and I mean that. Every single thing I own fit in 2 boxes. And we hit the road. We moved to my undergraduate institution. We drove down the street. We went to my residence hall. We arrived on campus. My parents stood by while I checked in. They helped me move both of those 2 boxes up to my room. And then there was this really awkward moment. There wasn't anything left to do. My parents gave me a hug, handshake for Dad. They drove away. And at that moment, everything that I had ever known melted away completely. I had no family, I had no friends, I had no community whatsoever. Now, luckily for me, my RA promptly introduced himself. I met a few other kids down the hall. I connected with my residence hall director. I connected with the person in campus life. My new community, my new support system started to evolve around me from that moment. The people that I met in my residence hall would go on to go to grad school with me. They would be in my wedding. They would be godparents to my children. And I'd be willing to bet that many of you had that exact same situation. I mean, that's really why we do what we do. And this is one of the hardest things for me to kind of admit to, that experience, my experience, our experience, will not be the experience of our students. Here's why. Here's what I mean by that. My freshman year. How many of you have read the book My Freshman Year by Rebecca Nathan? A really great read. The book was published in 2005. Essentially, Rebecca Nathan, anthropologist, goes back to school and relives her freshman year as a research project. She lives in the residence halls. She takes classes. She eats in the dining halls. She does everything that a freshman student would do on her campus. Along with the great story of her time, she makes some really, really important observations about how the college experience has changed in the recent past. There are 2 things that I want to highlight, 2 things that I think are especially important. The first one is that students come with community. She found that students come with community. What does that mean? Well, think back to my experience, your college experience. I didn't have a cell phone. Facebook did not exist. I essentially started from scratch with my community. Students today come with community. They're still connected to their high school networks. They talk to their parents on a daily basis. And now we have to challenge ourselves to fit into their existing communities and still contribute towards their growth in a meaningful way. Our jobs have changed. The second thing she found, their academic schedules are different. What do we mean by that? Well, think back again. When I went to college, everyone had very, very similar schedules. The entire building that I lived in, everyone would get up on Monday morning, they'd go to class for most of the day, they'd come back in the afternoon, and the entire floor or the entire building would meet around 6 p.m. and walk over to the dining hall where we would all eat lunch together or eat dinner together or whatever it was. We'd then return to our rooms later, we'd play cards or watch movies. The environment was all about community. It was geared toward us building community. But look now, with night classes, weekend classes, online classes, all those types of things, the chances that two students have the same schedules are next to none. The environment has changed, our jobs have changed. And that is the second big idea. We are no longer the sole source of community. So how are you fitting into community in the 21st century? How are you adding value to students' already busy lives? How are you meeting students where they are? Big idea number 3. We have a hippo problem. That's right, hippopotamus. So thus far we've talked about 2 big ideas, 2 big shifts regarding the way students have changed over the past several years. For the third, for this big one, I want to focus on the future. Big idea number 3 is simply that students are continuing to change. And I want to illustrate this in one very important way, and I call it the hippopotamus problem. I think we have a hippopotamus problem with online learning. So what do I mean? Well, let me tell you the story of the hippopotamus problem. When scientists started studying the hippo, as they often do, they look for closely related animals to study. And as all of us do, they made some assumptions based just on what they thought they knew. So they looked at this hippo, they saw this large mammal, it eats lots of plants, it lumbers around. They started comparing it to other large animals like it. They looked at pigs, because those kind of look similar. They looked at horses, things like that. But after all, again, they kind of look alike. This is where the heart of the hippo problem is, though. See, scientists were starting to sort of looking in the wrong direction based only on what they could see. The problem here is that the hippo wasn't very much like a pig at all. In fact, the hippo's closest living relative, believe it or not, is the dolphin. At some point, about 55 million years ago, these two animals diverged on their evolutionary journey, but it turns out that biologically, they're still very similar. So for years, based on some assumptions, they were looking in the completely wrong direction and therefore wasted a little bit of time learning about this beautiful, majestic hippo. What does that have to do with online education? Well, I think we have a little bit of a hippo problem going on right now in online education and our assumptions about the impacts to the bricks and mortar experience. With this idea of MOOCs and the growing sector of online education and higher ed, I continue to read articles, blog posts, have conversations with people that see this as the end of traditional education. I continue to see student affairs and housing professionals in this small state of panic about a future that looks a little bit bleak, but I think we might be looking a little bit in the wrong direction. Let me tell you what I mean. Let's look at the facts. Across the country, online education is absolutely exploding. According to the Sloan Survey of Online Learning, in the fall of 2008, 4.6 million students took a college-level course online. That was up 17% from the prior year. Digest that. 4.6 million people in 2008 were taking an online class. Last year, that number grew to a staggering 6.7 million, which pushed the proportion of all students taking at least one online course at an all-time high of 32%. That's 1/3 of all of our college students are enrolled in some sort of online class. So what do we see? Well, I think we, as housing professionals and student affairs administrators, see this shrinking demographic of students. I think we look at these numbers and we see the many outlets for alternative forms of education, and we think this is not the residential college experience. Essentially, we're looking at this hippo and we're saying we don't need to worry about these people. But I could argue that something very different might be going on here. Let's zoom in one more time on the numbers for a minute. Of the massive number of students enrolled online, a large majority, 65%, were simultaneously enrolled in face-to-face courses on their campus. 65% of these people were enrolled in face-to-face courses on their campus. Look at the University of Florida as an example where I work. Residential students are now earning 25% of their credits online this semester, and that figure is expected to grow dramatically. Here's where the problem of looking in the wrong direction is killing us. While we're over here thinking we don't need to worry about these people, our students aren't going away. They're just changing, and we're not preparing to serve them. I'd argue that we don't even know how to serve them. If I took a survey of the number of CHOs who took online coursework in their college education, what do you think the response would be? 0% maybe? But with that in mind, how many people in this room feel truly prepared to serve students on your campus who are taking large portions of their classes online? I don't know that any of us are. And with the role of on-campus housing being to support the academic mission of the institution, the expectation of our services is poised to change. How does having online students in your buildings impact the way that you serve them? How does this change programming initiatives? How does this change living learning programs? Heck, how does this change community building in general? The short answer for me is I don't know. But my job today, again, is not to create answers, it's to create questions. And I hope that you, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, will think about these things on the plane ride home and possibly next year bring us some great answers. With that said, I want to leave you with one last piece, and that's that the next time you're presented with a hippopotamus for a problem, I hope that you don't forget to look for the dolphins. Thank you and have a wonderful day.